Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the In Off the Post podcast. Yes, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Daniel Bevan, and this is the In Off the Post podcast. Changing up the intro a little bit. I hope you like that. We are different people. We've been away for a little bit, but we are back now. I'm, of course, here with Ross Dawson. Hello, Ross.
Hello, Dan. Hello, everyone. Hello.
We won't go into too much detail about where we've been, why we've been away, but it's been a very stressful time of year for us. We've had problems with the studio, problems with snow, but now it's lovely and sunny outside, and we've got a lot to say. The season is finished for myself as a Cardiff City fan, and I'm sure that you're all very much aware of what's been going on in the Welsh capital at the moment. So we will be talking about that as well as other results in the Championship. We'll also be talking a little bit about the Premier League and a bit beyond. So Rossimo, give me your first topic of conversation.
Yes, of course. So if you were somehow been living under a rock for the past couple of days and you live in the South Wales region, then you may not know that Cardiff City have in fact been promoted to the Premier League in the most Cardiff City way possible, drawing 0-0 against Reading and then having their contenders lose 3-1 to help them go up. So I wasn't at the game, unlike the rest of Cardiff, but you were at the game, weren't you, Bev?
I was surrounded by Liverpool fans. I want to say welcome, lads. It's nice to have you back. I missed you. I didn't. But no, I've obviously, as a season ticket holder, and I've been one for 10 years, this is a very important moment for me. I feel like it was much better than the first time round. We went up, but we were in a different colour, and the club was just a shrill of its former self. And it almost felt a bit fake. If you look back at it now as a Cardiff fan, it doesn't. And you look at the squad photo, it doesn't look like those are our players. But this is a squad that the whole team, the whole city has gotten around, and they've got so much personality, and it just feels so much better, and it feels so much better that we did it in blue. I think that's the main takeaway from all of that. But I mean, absolutely, you're so right to say that we did it in the most Cardiff City way possible, because we have got such a tradition of messing up at the last hurdle, or making it traditionally incredibly hard for ourselves, and drawing 0-0, giving Reading their first away point under Paul Clements was just, what can I say? That was pretty magical. But we've got a lot to thank Birmingham for, and I'd also want to give a shout out to the Birmingham fan who now has to get a tattoo on his rear end of Gary Monk's face. So I'm reliably informed that Gary Monk is actually going to pay for that tattoo. So
is that an actual thing?
It is. I can link it to you after the show. I haven't got a lot of good things to say about Gary Monk or Paul Clements, given their former connections to Swansea. But lads, you did Cardiff good. You are heroes in the Welsh capital. Just this once.
So anyway, take us through the game itself, or the day itself. Actually, how did you start your day? Which pub did you go to first?
That's a good question, because I didn't do that. I actually did the complete opposite. I know a lot of Cardiff fans went straight out to the pub and tried to make a full day of it, and I did make a day of it in the evening, don't get me wrong, but I woke up as late as humanly possible, half an hour before I was due to leave, because I was a nervous wreck this week. And Saturday night, me and my housemate, both Cardiff fans, we just couldn't concentrate on anything, watching football on the telly as we do, almost all the time, and we just talk all the way through it. We honestly, we'd be a nightmare to listen to if you were actually trying to watch the game with us. But it was just pure silence, because we both knew what was on each other's mind, and we didn't want to bring it up. In fact, we'd also agreed that we wouldn't say, wouldn't talk about Cardiff getting promoted. We say if Sunday goes well. So that was the kind of level we were at.
Well, thankfully Sunday did go well for you, just in not the way you hoped for.
That's true. I mean, the day, like I say, it started off me waking up really late. We drove to the game. I had a pint to steady my nerves, but I didn't want to go too mad. I wanted to still remember the day. Um, I did really enjoy it this time, but it was an odd one because we went into it knowing full well that a win was pretty much the only result we could have wanted or needed. We couldn't have imagined a team that like Fulham, who had been on a 23-game unbeaten streak, would lose to Birmingham. So we were, no disrespect to Birmingham, but they weren't exactly expected to win that game. So when we were there watching the game, it was very mundane, and then next thing you know, the crowd started celebrating as if we'd scored, even though Neil Etheridge had the ball in his hands, and everyone started looking at their phones, and it was 1-0 to Birmingham. And then maybe 10 minutes later, the same thing happened again, but this time it was actually a hoax that was going around on Twitter. So it went round, and then there was a bunch of people like calming everybody down, and then a couple of minutes later, they actually did make it 2-0. So everyone went up again. And there were some people saying, is it 3-0? Some people were saying, is it still 1-0? And there's been 2 hoaxes. What's going on? It was really confusing. And it wasn't until, and there was no signal at the stadium, it wasn't until half-time when I rang my dad, who was at home. I was on the phone to him. He was like, no, it actually is 2-0 now. So I was, over the moon. At half-time, I think everyone thought, this is it. We've done it. All we need to do is just ride out the game. Having said that, the Cardiff players were obviously very aware that it was a 2-0 result, or latest score over in the Midlands, and also that Reading needed a point to stay up. So the second half was a borderline match fixing. It was very boring. It was very back and forth. Cardiff had the much better of the chances, and if they were on their full pelt, I think Cardiff would have probably run around that game 3 or 4-0 winners. But a point was good enough. By 5 minutes to go, it was, I think at that point, 3-1 to Birmingham. So nobody thought Fulham were going to turn it round at that point. And the referee lost complete control of the game, and there was in pitch invasion. and then because he thought that they'd, the fans thought that the final whistle had gone, which it didn't. And then it actually did go, and everyone stormed the pitch, and it was a great party, which I think some people, as we record this on Tuesday night, are still out, which I salute them for.
Yeah, thankfully it was a bank holiday yesterday, so I'm sure a lot of people are thankful for the day off work. But it seems like it's not a proper final game of the season in a relegation battle if a team struggling does not cheer for a goal that's gone in a game like hundreds of miles away. It just seems to be a tradition in in British football, and I just love it. But talk to me a little bit about the ghost throw-in, as they call it, for Reading. Did you notice it in the game?
I'm very sorry to expose you live on air, Ross, but have you not seen Chris Gunter debunk it?
I haven't, no.
It's on his Twitter at the moment. I don't blame you, because numerous people have actually talked to me about this, and I've had to say that it's not true. The line is actually on the shadow, so I don't like. I looked at it for the first time when people were talking about it, and I had to take a double take. But that line that looks like another throw, looks like the actual touch line, is actually the advertising board.
Wow. Okay.
So. Yeah,
I didn't watch the game live. I just saw the video on Twitter, and I was just, it did look to me like a throw-in line, but oh well.
Yeah, it's a vision trick, isn't it? And I think Chris Gunter phenomenally called this guy some name on Twitter and said that he lacked common sense. So yeah, a lot of people want Cardiff to sign Chris Gunter, to which I say, I'm pretty sure Mendes Lang had him in his back pocket, so if they want him, just talk to Mendes Lang.
Anyway, so moving on from the game, do you think that, notoriously Neil Warnock has arguably not had the best record in the Premier League, but he has managed to turn around Cardiff's fortunes drastically in the last 18 months, given that he took over the club who was struggling with relegation, and now he's gained an automatic promotion spot with the same club and more or less the same set of players, a lot of new names, but more or less the same side. But do you think he changes his approach now? Do you think he's going to look at the Premier League differently, or do you think he's just going to keep doing what he's doing?
I think, like any good coach, he would look at his team now and consider how they would fare in the Premier League in terms of the style of play. Ultimately, I don't think that Cardiff's current style of play, which was a lot more Route 1 towards the end of the season, would be as effective in the Premier League. But they actually started this season, if you remember, they won the first 5 games, playing a lot more direct and on the ground, but still playing. I want to say long balls, but they were by no means the most long balls in the league. If you look at the chart, the table, or whatever. So I mean, it's a hard question to say, but it'll be obviously based on the players that Neil Warnock decides to bring in. And I do have confidence in him to bring in the kind of players that he wants, to play the way that he wants. At the end of the day, make no mistake, what he's done with that squad, turning it round in 18 months, is nothing short of a miracle. And even if you wanted to question his previous managerial record in the Premier League and look at some of the managers who are currently available and think maybe Cardiff should be a bit more audacious, at the end of the day, Neil Warnock has to call the shots. If he wanted to retire right now and become a director of football, I don't think many people would really complain, me included. I would love to have someone like Marco Silva or what have you come in, but this squad is built the way that Neil Warnock wants it to play.
No, yeah, that's fair enough. So what do you think needs to be done to secure survival? Do you think it's literally just buy in the right players, or do you think something else needs to be done?
The team spirit is about as high as it'll ever be right now. Naturally, when you win promotion.
I mean, when you have a player like Sean Morrison in the side, how can your team morale not be high?
It's so true, and I'm glad that you point that out as someone who's not a Cardiff fan, because
he's become a cult hero of mine just for the videos I've seen of him on social media, and I'm not even a Cardiff fan. So
some less explicit than others, but
yeah, certainly.
I mean, come on, you've got to love his personality, but it's not just him. I mean, they're all clearly friends. Obviously, as you said, it was a bank holiday, so they won promotion. We had the awards night on Sunday night. They all clearly went out, had a good time, and then this is true. You can see it through all the players' social media and whatnot. They spent Monday afternoon together in one of the players' back gardens having a barbecue with all their families. Like, this is more than just a squad of individuals. This is I don't want to say family because it's so overused, but they really are like just a group of mates who went to school together who have kept in touch for 10 years. And that's what it feels like. That's what it looks like from the outside looking in. And they're all they all clearly get along. And that's the Neil Warnock effect. That's what he does. If you look at all of his teams who he's got promoted, they're all really, really in touch. They all have reunions together. Even the Scarborough club, who he got promoted from the National League to the Football League. That was how many years ago? I think maybe 25, something like that. I mean, they still have reunions, so there's no reason why this group won't.
I mean, for me, Warnock certainly needs to spend smart, because there's lots of TV money coming in, but we've seen firsthand clubs who may be in a similar position to what Cardiff are going to be in August, have not spend their money wisely. I mean, if you just look at Stoke, for example, Jack Butland has recently come out in displaying Stoke's transfer business as farcical, which is quite remarkable, if you pardon the rhyme. But yeah, so we've seen firsthand that Stoke necessarily haven't, even though they're one of the the best teams in recent memory to go down to be relegated. Like, I mean, the caliber of players that they've got, and like Xherdan Shaqiri, Afellay, Bojan, Joe Allen. They've got so many good players, and it's so weird to see them go down. But that clearly sees another issue come to the surface. So, which leads me to transfers. I mean, do you give Warnock free reign over transfers as long as they give him the money to do it?
Absolutely. And the best part about Neil Warnock is that his transfer policy is to not spend that much money. I don't want to refer to Burnley too much over this because it's become a bit of a cliche at the moment. The parallels between Cardiff and them and whatnot.
I mean, it's a warranted cliche because they've just secured Europa League football, and when you look at that Burnley team before the start of this season, there's no one player that really stands out to you.
No, that's true, and also massive congrats to them. I'm very happy for them. I think they actually deserve it personally out of all the teams who have been challenging around that, 6th to 10th place. The ones who aren't fighting for relegation. I think they are by far the standout team. But when they went up the first time, Sean Dyche was still the coach, and he said then, we're not going to be spending stupid money. We can't afford to. It would be ridiculous for us to do that. They went down the first year, and then they went straight back up again because they went down and invested in good Premier League quality players in the Championship. Not to the extent that Wolves did, but they brought in good players. I think Andre Gray was one of the signings of them who ended up being their top goal scorer.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, Andre Gray hasn't exactly been setting the world alight since then, but they sold him on for profit for £20 million to Watford. So, look, what I'm saying is that even if Cardiff go straight back down again, the important thing is that we're not spending 40, 50, 60 million pounds on all these average players on huge wages just because they're, quote, Premier League proven, because that doesn't really mean too much if they're not doing it for you, and then if they go down, they're not going to jump ship immediately and go to another club. They'll maybe stay with us and we'll go straight back up again, and then we'll have another proper go and we'll be better. So that's the way I think that Cardiff need to be going about it.
Would you prefer for Cardiff to spend the Premier League money for obviously being promoted into more in terms of ratio to infrastructure as opposed to players? Because if we take the example of Manchester City, obviously on a much, much higher scale, obviously with their billion pound ownership, they've spent a lot of money on players, but they've also invested a lot of money in things such as training grounds, like the youth academy, stuff like that. Would that be an area that you'd prefer more invested in rather than players?
Not in the immediate future, because Cardiff have already invested over the last couple of seasons a fair bit of money redeveloping their ground and well, they train at the Vale, but the House of Sport that they own and whatnot, and are helping young players develop. Our academy, I've said this before on the show and I'll say it again, was absolutely demolished in the year or so that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was at the club, and it wasn't really helped that Malky Mackay also, I wouldn't say neglected it, but certainly didn't help too much. But Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was the main issue of that. And then Russell Slade had to basically release a bunch of 23-year-olds who were in our under-21s. So we're still recovering from that. However, there are some key players in our academy now who are hitting about 19, who it's a make-or-break year for them, and whether they are going to be released or whether they're going to be held on to, I mean, that remains to be seen with the retained list that'll come out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So my main point would be to focus on the immediate future rather than the 4, 5, 6 years time at the moment. That would be my main priority. If you're going to ask me, should I spend £10 million on a proven Premier League striker, whatever that means, or £10 million on redeveloping team, I think it should be on the striker for now.
So moving on to transfers and spending money on the players themselves, which areas of the team and which players would you like to see Warnock recruit this summer?
I think that there are 7 key players that we'll need. I could kind of go through them one by one if you back and I think that's probably the best way of doing it. Otherwise, it'll be me talking for 10 minutes.
So, if you think Warnock's going to deploy Callum Patterson more as a number 10, do you think right back is an area you need to strengthen?
Oh, definitely. Lee Peltier has received a lot of high praise from 18 months or so, even at one point saying that if you gave him £10 million, you wouldn't be able to buy a better right back. Don't know about that, if I'm perfectly honest. A first team right back is very key, very, very key. Without throwing names around just yet, they'll need to be able to attack quite well, but know their position. There are too many fullbacks out there right now who want to be, right wingers, left wingers, and sometimes that is a tactic. You could play the Chelsea way, I suppose, of them bossing that line, but that's not how we play. So we'll definitely need a right back, and to a lesser extent a left back. I'm a big fan of Joe Bennett. Certainly the best left back we've had at the club that I can remember in my lifetime. But we'll need some competition, I think, as well.
You never know. Fulham fail to get through the playoffs. You never know. Right, Ryan Sessegnon could make an appearance at left back for Cardiff. And
God, no.
That's a joke, obviously. But I think fullbacks, especially in worldwide football, they've become more of a figure of experience rather than youthful excitement in recent years. I mean, you've seen with the likes of Dani Alves, with Philip Lahm, even with Manchester United now, Antonio Valencia and Ashley Young are both doing really well as in fullbacks, as they're approaching their mid-30s, which is quite remarkable. So I think an experienced fullback could definitely solidify a solid defence alongside Sol Bamba and
Mr. Morrison.
Yeah, Mr. and Morrison.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people talking about Ryan Fredericks from Fulham. I was going to say arguably, but I don't think there is much arguably about it. The best right back who has been in the division this year. If Fulham don't go up, I mean, I would absolutely love to have him at the club, and whether he would come up or not, I don't know. I wondered if there was going to be any bad blood between the Fulham players and some of the Cardiff players, like there's been with other clubs. But he did congratulate us on our promotion. So, and who knows, maybe he's trying to get a good word in just in case.
I mean, in terms of teams going down in the Premier League, there's certainly a lot of players that you could swipe from them. I'm not sure if is it Kevin Peters who's the Stoke right back at the moment?
I don't think it's Kevin Peters. It's something Peters. Although it could be wrong. The American guy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see why not. We'll have to have a look. I trust that a right back can be almost anybody in terms of, you don't need to get, I'm going to use the phrase again, a Premier League proven right back necessarily. You could get one on the continent for cheap who's really, really good, and come to Cardiff and do a decent job. I'm not sure if anyone will remember this name. It's a very obscure name, who Cardiff bought when they went out the last time, Kevin Teofil-Catherine. Nobody knew who he was, and he was a very odd, obscure player. I think his biggest accolade was having the longest name of any player in FIFA 14. So that's a genuine fact about him. But he was a good player, and he maybe not, the best player in the world, but he was, a solid right back. There's no reason why someone like that couldn't come to Cardiff, but maybe not exactly Kevin. You can stay in France at the moment. I think I wouldn't welcome him back with open arms.
Well, I mean, certainly from my perspective, I think Timothy Fosu-Mensah has been doing great work at Palace this season, but I don't think we're letting you have him.
I don't know if I mean, you could probably tell me more about him than I could tell you. But I mean, I don't know. Is he gonna? Would he do a job for us? Do you think?
I think he's definitely showing the foundation, like he's definitely planting the foundations that he has everything and all the potential in the world to become a great right back. I mean, he's fast, he's a great tackler of the ball. I think the one weakness of his game, though, however, so far is getting forward, and I think that's why he's more been deployed as a centre back for United over the years as opposed to a right back. But he's getting games at right back for Crystal Palace has definitely worked wonders for him.
Well, maybe I wouldn't be against that then. But talking about Premier League players who are on loan at Crystal Palace, if I could put together a dream of if money was no object, Ruben Loftus-Cheek would be very high up on their list of transfers for me. Don't get me wrong, I've got my feet on the ground. I don't think that we'd ever sign him on loan or not. But he is a total baller, like absolute baller, and he's tall enough to be working in our system, but also good enough, on his feet to be an improvement on what we've already got. But anyway, that's just me, just being a bit dreamy. Either way, so I've given you one answer in terms of the kind of players that we need. Another one we'll move on to is a goalkeeper. Now, this is a really, really contentious one because there's a lot of people saying that maybe Neil Etheridge should stay as our number one. And to be fair, if that's what Warnock decides, I wouldn't really have many qualms about it. But at the moment, our reserve goalkeeper is Brian Murphy. I think he's 37 now. I imagine he'll probably retire because his contract's up in the summer. Either that or go back to Ireland, which is where he was going to go before he came to Cardiff. Definitely did a shift for us. I can't fault the lad, but I don't think he's a reserve goalkeeper quality in the Premier League. But what is really important is that we get in a player who is able to challenge for that number one spot. That we don't just get a backup, because if we just get an outright backup, I think that it puts the wrong mentality into Etheridge's mind. He's already come such a long way from where we had him at the start of the season, where his distribution was very poor. He's very slow off the line. To now, where his distribution is probably his biggest attribute, his best attribute. He's also a fantastic shot stopper. So we want to push him to be the best that he can be. He'll also be the first ever Philippines player to ever play in the Premier League. So that's an interesting little nugget of information for you. But what I just want is not to go mad, but to bring in somebody who is good enough to challenge for that number one. If I was going to have to throw in any names, Joel Robles, I believe, is out of contract at Everton, so he'd be a decent shout. And there's even a few people saying Tom Heaton. I think that's a bit unrealistic, but I get on board.
That one's definitely reaching. But I've said to you at the beginning of the podcast, or before we were recording, sorry, I don't know what the Burnley coaching staff and the Burnley goalkeeper coaching staff are doing at the moment, but the last 2 seasons we've seen the emergence of both Tom Heaton and Nick Pope, who's been incredible this season, both of which have actually earned themselves England call-ups after their remarkable season. So I think Tom Heaton would be a great signing for Cardiff, but whether he will actually go there is another question, because there's not many teams at the moment in the Premier League who are in the market for a goalkeeper, which is mad when you consider the goalkeepers that are in fact already been relegated or could potentially be relegated.
And last year there were a lot of Premier League clubs after goalkeepers.
Yeah. I mean, we saw Everton recruit from the relegated Sunderland to buy Jordan Pickford for £25 million. So that shows how desperate they were.
Yeah, of course, and there was Joe Hart, who was off on the market, and he could have gone to a very a big number of clubs.
Even Manchester City, who paid a world record goalkeeper fee for Edison. Yeah,
well, that's disputed because technically Buffon was more, but with inflation. Yeah, either way, I'm not going to get into that debate. yeah, you're right, and. Things could change because Jack Butland's definitely going to leave Stoke. I'm not saying Cardiff will get Jack Butland, but he could go to somebody,
he's definitely a player who could slot right in on a top 10 team at least.
Yeah, you're right. But he could go to someone like West Ham, and then who knows, maybe Adrian's.
But
It's very early.
we've been saying for the past couple of seasons that West Ham are going to finally break the ceiling and get into a solidified top 8, top 7 position, but they just never seem to do it.
Well, I don't think signing David Moyes on was a particularly ambitious choice.
Well, in the opening game, in the first decent run of games, he actually seemed to be turning their fortunes around quite well, considering that West Ham were among the 59,000 teams in the Premier League who were in the relegation battle before Christmas.
That's actually an actual statistic, by the way.
That's an actual
59,000.
statistic. I mean, if you look at Crystal Palace, Crystal Palace are in 11th place at the moment.
And after the start of the season they had, I honestly think deserves a bit more credit than he's getting.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, he came in as a meme. I don't know whether I'm recalling this correctly or not, but there was definitely, in my mind, some people wanting Alan Pardew back more than they wanted
I remember that.
Roy Hodgson. Having said all that, Alan Pardew ended up basically burying West Brom.
Shout out West Brom on the, I think, 4th or 5th manager for the season. Interesting statistic, anyway.
Yeah,
but I think
we're in the middle of this conversation about Cardiff's potential transfers. I will give a massively deserved shout out to Mr. Darren Moore over at West Brom. I mean, he's basically rescuing the Titanic with a shovel at this point. But winning the Premier League Manager of the Month for April on the same day they got relegated. Although it's an interesting stat, I think that it just goes to show that he's genuinely doing an incredible job there. And if he doesn't get the job permanently in the second tier, then there is something terribly, terribly wrong.
So this leads me now on to the last point of Cardiff before we go on to more Premier League talk. I'm going to play devil's advocate with you because we talked about players coming in, but do you think any players will go in the wake of promotion to the Premier League? Do you think any will not be able to handle it? And I think the main topic for debate over the last 2 or so years has been Aaron Gunnarsson, and do you think he will finally secure another, sign an extended deal with City now that he's playing at the level that he should? Or do you think he'll look for pastures new?
There's a lot to pick from that question, so bear with me whilst I entertain it. I'll start with Aaron Gunnarsson. If he doesn't sign on, I'll be gutted because it was going to be an uphill battle trying to keep him. After all, he in my opinion, for the last 2 or 3 years, has been too good for us, and he was brilliant in the Premier League the last time. Having said all that, it was kind of put to him. Put to Neil Warnock earlier on in the season that would it be a case of if Cardiff go up, he'll sign on. And although he didn't explicitly say yes, he just sort of said, well, if we don't go up, he'll leave. If we do go up, he'll probably stay. So I think he'd be silly to leave. He's settled here. His wife's about to have a second child. His first child was born here. So, at the end of the day, he is settled. And I
think he would definitely take on the prospect of another season with the Bluebirds, giving it another go before potentially moving on to another club. I think that would definitely suit the narrative in terms of his career at City.
Unless he wants to go and get a massive payday somewhere else. And in which case, I don't think I'd blame him. He's been a massive sub, and he's been a fantastic player. Going back to what you were saying, sorry, I just smacked the mic. Going back to what you were saying earlier, though, about players who are leaving, I very highly doubt Lee Tomlin has played another game, or will play another game in a Cardiff shirt. It might be a case of waiting and seeing how he does over the pre-season. But after his performances for his former coach, Ata Karanka, over in Nottingham, I imagine they'll come in for him and probably pay more than we paid for him. So that's a nice little profit. Gary Medine, however you want to say it, probably as well has not got a very good look in. I don't think that he's a Premier League quality player, and it's a very, very hard one to wrap your head around. At the end of the day, Cardiff paid £6 million for him, and if his contributions were good because he got a couple of assists and important goals. But although he didn't actually score himself. So, buying him for 6, going up and then selling him for 3, I'd say that's good business at the end of the day because you're losing 3 million but gaining 130. But, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe he'll prove me wrong and we can, form a decent partnership because his problem is that as a lone striker, he doesn't really work. Then there's the other players who have been fringe. I don't think there's going to be many players who we had on loan who, much as I thank Craig Bryson for his contribution, don't really think he'll make the step up. Same for someone like Armand Traore, Jamie Ward. I think they'll probably stay where they are. Danny Ward as well. He's a good player, but missed the second half of the season through injury. I'll be interested to see if he finds his way ever playing at Cardiff again. There's a lot of these players. Matt Connolly couldn't get into the Cardiff squad, although Neil Warnock spoke very highly of him constantly. Always said he was his 19th man, which is a bit of a kick in the teeth, personally. Always said if I had one person who was injured in the warm-up, he'd be the first person in. Well, that doesn't really say too much about him, but we'll see. This, by the way, is Matthew Connolly's 4th promotion to the Premier League, and I wonder if he actually has more promotions to the Premier League than he does actually Premier League appearances. Certainly didn't play that much when he went up with us the last time. There's a lot of these players. Anthony Pilkington as well. Right into the card be a lot more interesting because at the moment I feel like it's just me shouting names that people haven't really thought of. But Anthony Pilkington, what happens to him? He had almost nothing part to play up until after January, where Cardiff elected not to sell him, and then popped up with a couple important goals and important performances. Will they, stick with him, or will he be shot? It's all very much up in the air, but there is certainly a lot of deadwood that needs to be cut from that squad. And if you're adding 8 players, then I think there's at least 8 that need to go.
And there's been a major talking point about, I've seen you mention it on Twitter especially, but there's been a talking point about whether Marco Grujic will extend his loan. There's a lot of complications in terms of contractual, eligibility of signing another loan deal. But would you take him for another season?
I'd snap anybody's hand off who offered that to me. Personally, you could tell when he was in the Championship that he is a Premier League player, and I don't mean that in the sense that he was bossing every game, that he was too good. But the Championship is an interesting league. It's an awkward one because it's a lot more fast paced than the Premier League is, and it's also a lot more. In the Premier League, you get a lot more. And that's what he was expecting when he was playing a couple times, and he did adapt by the end of it, and was a very important player. I would 100% take him out of any loan player that we had for another year. I don't know. There were some people questioning whether we could have him on loan for a second season. I've never heard of such a rule.
I think it's more of because did he fulfil the 14 games required in his contract or not, or will Cardiff owe money to Liverpool for that?
He didn't, but as it actually happened, it was sort of, I wouldn't say misreported. Warnock was a bit misleading about it. He was being a bit shrewd. He said that there was about 14 games in which that was, we had to pay a penalty if you didn't play 14. But
I do remember how adamant he was about the fine and how he ensured fans and Liverpool, in fact, that he would in fact play those 14 games.
As it happened, he played 13. So what it ended up actually being, this is my understanding of the deal, that instead it's going to be it was more of a, he'll play X amount of games and you won't get fined if he plays X minus 4 number of games. You won't get fined, or you'll get fined less. So it's like 14, and Cardiff wouldn't have had to pay any fine. Maybe I'm picking a number off the top of my head here, but say 10 games, then they'd have to pay less and less. More and more and more and more.
Well, I mean, it's definitely not unrealistic, the prospect of him re-signing a loan deal with Cardiff, especially with how well Liverpool are doing at the moment, and the fact that they've got Naby Keita from RB Leipzig arriving this summer. So there's definitely midfield talent in Liverpool at the moment. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets offloaded again on a loan deal, and I don't see why Cardiff couldn't. I mean, they've definitely got the money to do it now.
That's true. And the other thing is that I've been chatting to a lot of Liverpool fans about him, and I mean, not exactly like there's an abundance of the money or anything over here in South Wales. No, but chatting to Liverpool fans, they don't think that he'll have a look in there. Nothing to do with the fact that he is playing for Cardiff or anything, just because their midfield has been so good this year. Emre Can still coming back from an injury, although it does look like he'll probably end up leaving. But if he stays, then Grujic has definitely got no chance of getting into that team.
Well, James Milner's putting in world-class performances on a weekly basis now, which is unheard of.
Also out of contract, but I imagine he'll stay on.
He's too vital of a player for Liverpool at the moment, especially in the midfield.
Yeah, absolutely. Even Genie Wijnaldum, who, I mean, come on, give him some credit where it's due. Scoring goals away from home, he's playing well if that's happening.
Yeah, I think he was played as a more holding midfielder on the weekend, and he did quite struggle with that because, if I'm not mistaken, I think Henderson came on off the bench. But he's definitely one of those players that you can see in a more playing in the centre of midfield, but being more of a box-to-box sort of player.
Oh, totally. And then there's also, I think you've already mentioned Naby Keita coming back in as well. And yeah, look, Marko Grujic is a good player, and Jurgen Klopp has numerous times said that he wants him. He's got a future plan for him. He just needs to get the minutes elsewhere. That's also sort of where Liverpool's loan policy is a bit frustrating, I can imagine, for some Liverpool fans, because there's a lot of players, namely people like Harry Wilson, Ben Woodburn, and Marko Grujic, to name a few, who you're going to want to have good experience somewhere else before they come into the first team. But then also there's a lot of clubs who are, risking, being fined if they don't play a certain number of games if they don't play, and that's unattractive. But Marko Grujic will be, I'm 99% certain of it, if he was to sign on, an important player for Cardiff. So I think a 75% appearances, if he's match fit, is something that they could deal with.
Definitely. Anyway, should we move on to Premier League talk? Because while the Championship is over, the Premier League is entering. Well, in fact, as we're speaking now, the final two games have commenced. Just less than an hour ago, Swansea's bid for survival took a deep blow as they lost 1-0 at home to Southampton, which means that Southampton are looking likely that they're going to be safe this year. Huddersfield are obviously behind them, level on points, but with the game in hand, in fact. But they're facing Chelsea and Arsenal this weekend. Well, the Chelsea game is tomorrow night, I believe, and then they take on Arsenal on the weekend. So a tough run of fixtures for Huddersfield, but it's looking it's not looking good for Swansea at the moment. I mean, they do take on Stoke on the weekend, but it's definitely out of their hands. Even if they do win against Stoke on the weekend, then they need to rely on other results for their survival. But it seems as though the fact that this relegation battle in the Premier League this year has gone to the last game is only suitable given that how close the relegation battle has been this year. And I said to you at the beginning, I also said to you before we recorded this podcast, that I can't tell if, in terms of the bottom half of the season, it's been magnificent or terrible, and the relegation battle has been more exciting than the race for the league title, which is quite weird.
Well, I mean, it obviously depends on what which angle you're coming at. because if you're a fan of the top six teams or any of the top six teams, you're going to say that this year has been awful for you. But if you're a fan of one of the teams who are in the relegation battle but managed to survive, like your Southampton or whatnot, I actually think the season wasn't awful.
I mean,
With
even
what was
Everton,
faced.
even Everton were in the mix earlier on in the season, and they've managed to pull it up to 8th. It seems that it's only been teams below 7th place that have not looked certain on survival. It's only been the top 7 teams that you can say like they're not going down, which is it's really remarkable for a Premier League season to have that many candidates for relegation.
Of course, and then you've got to look at one of those top 7, Burnley. So it's an odd one. It certainly has been a really interesting Premier League season. I'm more on the fence. It's been great because you've got to see some incredible football, some world-class players playing some world-class style football in terms of Man City.
And then some not so world-class players also playing world-class football in terms of Burnley.
Shout out Scott Arfield.
It's definitely been a very... there's been a moral to the story, I think, with this season's Premier League in terms of if you're a team like Stoke City who spend a lot of money in a bid to break into the top 10 or the top 7, then it's not necessarily going to go your way. You look at Bournemouth, Watford, Brighton, even Huddersfield in some cases, they're all teams with championship quality players, but they've still held their own this season in the Premier League, and I think that paves the way for definitely the teams that are coming up. But it's been remarkable. I mean, we've talked about Stoke City potentially being one of the best teams to ever get relegated until we researched the 2002-2003 West Ham squad, which if you don't know much about, just Google it because it's quite the squad and they got relegated.
Yeah, you pulled that up earlier and I was quite shocked at that. You'd think that pretty much that team, if they were all in their prime, would have finished top half of the Premier League quite easily. But yeah, this season has been odd. It's certainly been an interesting one from a neutral point of view, which I will get off Cardiff, I promise. But that's the worst thing about going up is not watching the Premier League from a neutral point of view anymore. Every game matters to you now, which it does suck because it is the best league in the world. However, I've got to give props to some of the these clubs. Watford started this season fantastically well, then flirted with relegation, then managed to pull it out by the end of it. Claude Puel as well over at Leicester did incredibly well.
Who's interestingly being linked with his departure from Leicester, which I find quite stupid.
His style of football seems to get ragged on quite a lot, but a top 8 finish and now looking like probably a top 10 finish with Leicester. I think that really speaks for itself, to be honest with you. But either way, there's a lot of players who will be relegated from the Premier League, no matter who you're looking at, who will be picked up by the teams going up, or even some of the teams who are staying up, because if Southampton were to go down, their squad would just be cherry picked.
Oh yeah, the players that they've got, you've got Dusan Tadic, Charlie Austin, you've got
Boufal.
Yeah, Boufal, you've got Romeu, you've got so many good quality players, and
Højbjerg, of course.
Ryan Bertrand, who I've sung the praises of for months now, who's I think could break into a top 10 team easily.
Oh, absolutely, and even someone like James Ward-Prowse doesn't exactly do the prettiest job in the world, but he's a good player. Should we? How much else is there really to say about the Premier League other than Swansea really need to? They would probably take a miracle I would say by now, because yes, Huddersfield have got to play Chelsea and Arsenal, but they also took a point off Manchester City. It was probably one of the most boring games you'll ever see. However, if a point's a point at the end of the day, and if they need a point for survival, 100% they'll go to Stamford Bridge looking for a point.
So who are we pretty much decided on Swansea City being the team that will go down?
I think so, and I'm more than likely going to get a little bit of stick for being a Cardiff fan and saying that. However, I am firmly on the side of this idea that if there's two Welsh teams in the Premier League, that's better. And I know that's going to anger a lot of people. I
I
know that
wouldn't. I don't understand why though. If you're a Welsh football fan, why wouldn't you want two Welsh teams in the top flight?
1/10 of the Premier League being Welsh is always something that we can brag about together, humbly at Wales matches and whatnot. Football is more than just rivalry. Having said that, if we're on the terraces, then I'll be the first to start singing Blues are going up, Blues are going up, Jacks are going down. But again, like I say, having said all that, you want to put football, rivalry aside for a minute. Just think about it. I want to say logically, but some people will just take that as me being belittling and patronising. Just think that if you've got teams in Wales promoting Welsh talent, at the end of the day, that helps the Welsh national team. And if you're a Welsh football fan, then you want a Welsh derby next year. That's all I'm saying.
For sure. I mean, from a neutral perspective, I definitely want Swansea City to stay up because even since the years following their promotion to the Premier League, I mean, if you look at the 2012-2013 season when you had the likes of Michu and the sides, they were the massive breakout stars of the Premier League that season. And like you said, having two Welsh teams in the Premier League would work wonders for Welsh football. It would be the best thing to happen to Welsh football probably since Gareth Bale moving to Real Madrid, which is a massive, massive moment in Welsh football. But I'm slightly...
Heavily linked with a move away as well, Mr. Bale. So...
As ever, though, so we will take that with a pinch of salt. But I'm slightly more optimistic. I mean, we mentioned Huddersfield's remaining fixtures. You've said that they've got quite an impressive home record against like top six teams, which you said so rightfully. But Chelsea...
Not just that, Arsenal have got a poor away record as well. It's almost like it's too perfect.
Chelsea, I think, will definitely get the better of Huddersfield tomorrow night. Arsenal, I think, have been on a decent run of form. I mean, as we're speaking, in their last game, they beat Burnley 5-0, which is quite remarkable, and they'll want to end the season on a bang, definitely, given that it's Arsenal's last game in charge of the side. So I think Huddersfield... Swansea, they're not. It's all not done and dusted as of yet, but they definitely need a win in their next game, and hope that Huddersfield lose by quite wide margins in their next two.
Mm-hmm. Either way, I'm looking at this Premier League season now in awe, because last year I think we can all say with a vow of confidence that it was very boring, very, very boring.
Yeah. In terms of quality outside of Chelsea, it wasn't that good at all. And even if you look at the quality in terms of winners now with Man City, many have lauded them as being the best team in Europe at the moment, and that's still up for debate. I mean, but yeah, I think in terms of second and third place, I mean, you've seen how well Liverpool have been playing this season, and they're still going to finish third, which is unreal. I mean, fingers crossed if all goes to plan. I mean, I'll be at the Watford game on Sunday for the last game of the season, so hopefully we can finish it with a bang. But I'm fully expecting Jose to start a weakened side, given that we got the FA Cup final around the corner. So I'm not expecting too much from that game. But
Liverpool have got one eye on the Champions League final, so I think you'll.
Say that again, sorry.
Yeah, we broke up a little bit then for a second. Apologies for that. I think Liverpool have got one. Right. I'm not a Liverpool fan. I'm far from it. Well, actually, that makes me sound like an Everton fan. I'm not an Everton fan, although I do support a team in blue. I would very much like them to win the Champions League. I would very much like that to happen.
Me less so. I know too many Liverpool fans for them to rub that in my face, but
you'll never hear the end of it.
I won't.
But either way, should we touch on a little bit of the playoffs? Because I mean,
yes,
going back to the Championship, I suppose we've got probably one of the most competitive Championship playoffs that I've seen in a long time. Being
Mm.
someone who watches the Championship a lot more regularly than most.
Teams have definitely interchanged throughout the season in the playoff spots. I mean, you're talking about the likes of Bristol City, who've squandered their chances of promotion.
They were, yeah, I don't want to rub it in, but they were fighting for second almost as soon as the season started, and even up until Christmas, and finished 11th. I think that it may be testament to their fact they bottled it, which they did, but also the fact that like how competitive this year was. Millwall had a really good run, put that together towards the end of the season. Ended up just missing out, which I feel gutted for, because that would have been a good story.
Middlesbrough have done remarkably well as well, and even Aston Villa, who seem to have struggled in the Championship in recent years, finally looking as though they could get back to the Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely. And and even Derby, who up until as recently as February were looking to be automatic promotion contenders, ended up finishing sixth. So yeah, we've even got teams like Preston who are finishing just outside. We've got a very competitive league, which, what can I say, it is great for everybody. But having said that, it is Fulham versus Derby and Aston Villa versus Middlesbrough. Ross, as a neutral who maybe doesn't know as much about the Championship as you do the Premier League at the very least, out of those, who do you call the biggest club?
I mean,
I switched that up on you last minute.
the biggest club, or the club that I think is going to go up?
No, the biggest club, because as we all know, being the bigger club means a lot more in the Championship than it does actually points.
Oh, well, if we're talking about the biggest club, then Aston Villa, hands down.
I'm glad you said that.
I mean, historically, even in the early 2010s, you look at that Aston Villa side with the likes of Ashley Young, James Milner, all of those players. It was a decent side. It's been really weird watching their downfall. But if we're talking about teams who I think are going to go up, then I've got to say Fulham, even though it's probably the obvious answer given that they finished in third place. But I think they'll comfortably they'll comfortably sweep aside their opponents and I think get through to the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, they went unbeaten for half the season consecutively, 23 games, and didn't go up. That is more than unheard of. It's frankly ludicrous. So anyone would say that they were quite, unlucky, and some would even say they deserve to go up more than Cardiff. But points are points at the end of the day.
The breakout star of the season in terms of the Championship, and Ryan Sessegnon. He won Player of the Year for the Championship.
And as good as a midfield as you'll see in the division, Alexander Mitrovic ended up being a very, very good signing for them late on, because they were lacking a goal scorer.
Mm-hmm.
That's very true. So yeah, I mean, look, Fulham over two legs will beat anybody. I believe that wholeheartedly, and they will go through to Wembley. I'd be very, very surprised if Derby can turn them over. In terms of Villa and Middlesbrough, I think that's a bit more of an even match, but I do expect Villa to do that, do them over. They beat Wolves.
I think a Fulham Aston Villa final will be a really tantalising tie for neutrals to watch.
Now, here's the thing, though. Last year, we had a Reading and Huddersfield final. Now, Reading obviously nearly got relegated this year. But it was last year, they were fantastic. They were one of the teams to beat, there's no doubt about that. And two teams who last year played very good football, obviously Huddersfield went up, but it was a 0-0 final for a very long time. I think even throughout extra time. One of the most boring you've ever seen. So I'm, worried for the sake of this, tantalising final, because I would have loved to have seen a Huddersfield Reading final when both teams actually wanted to play. But either way, I am massively digressing. Fulham and Villa in a final is great, and over two legs, Fulham would have beaten Villa. However, I'm inclined to say that Villa could have got a much better chance meeting Fulham at the final, because when you get to Wembley,
anything can happen over one leg.
It's such an impressive thing. you know, I would have also said the same about Cardiff in the sense that they could have beaten Villa over 2 legs, but Villa could beat them in the one.
Mm.
At the end of the day, it is all about character. And I don't think Steve Bruce is exactly the most inspiring manager in the world. But if you can't get inspired by that, that occasion, then nothing will. And I think Villa have, I mean, in terms of players who have been in this position before, they've got the best squad in the Championship. For sure, Wolves imported a lot of young foreign talent, and sure, there's nothing wrong with that. But in terms of players who have been there, done that in the Championship, I don't think you can look past Villa in that experience.
Especially with the manager, because Steve Bruce is definitely a Premier League caliber manager, and he knows what to do and how to get to that level.
Well, I wouldn't say he's a Premier League caliber manager. He's certainly someone who you could employ to want to get you up, and he's been there, done that, as you said. But maybe he's been a bit lucky with the squads that he has had over the years and the amount of money. But I suppose that's a debate for another time.
For sure. So, are you agreeing with me in saying that Fulham are going to go up?
I think Fulham will go up. If they don't go up, it'll be quite surprising. But if it's a Fulham Villa final, I wouldn't bet too much on Fulham. I would say Villa are to be wary of.
And by our logic, if either Middlesbrough or Derby get to the final, then what a turnaround of events that will be.
Well, by our logic, we've just bigged up Fulham and Villa for the last 5 minutes, so it will be a Middlesbrough and Derby final. And I can't wait to see Tony Pulis back in the Premier League. I'll be loving it. Right, I think that is a good point to round off this little one-off special of the In Off the Post podcast. It was a bit spontaneous because me and Ross just had a bit we wanted to say, and well, a boring Twitter thread I think would probably not do it justice. There was a lot to talk about. Whether you could expect this every now and again, I don't know. Maybe you'll get lucky and you'll see a little bit more of us. What I will say is that we have things in the works and we've got plans, and we've said this before. It's been frustrating for us behind the scenes. We've got a lot of things we want to get done and a lot of things that we want to sort out to make the show better, to make the show more regular for you. But that isn't always how it works out. But all I can say is come September, there will be regular shows once again. Ross, is there anything else that you have to say?
No, just stay tuned to our Twitter at IOTP blog. Follow me at @Ardors_.
And myself at Dan Bevjourno. And we've hoped that you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to tell us how wrong we are in the comments or on Twitter. Subscribe and also like if you're listening to this on SoundCloud or whatever medium that you may be listening to this on. Who knows? It could be anywhere. Thank you very much and have a great evening. Ta-ra.
Ta-ra.